I watched my uncle's face go the color of old concrete. The word felony had barely cleared my lips when his knees buckled, not dramatically, not like the movies, just a slow, embarrassing fold, like a lawn chair giving up. He grabbed the edge of the kitchen counter and missed. His wife caught him by the elbow. Nobody in that room said a word. I stood there holding the registration document, my son's name printed in clean black ink across the top, and I did not move a single muscle to help him. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how we got here. Before I go back to where this started, subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Channel members heard the full uncut version of this story 3 days ago, including the part where the detective called me back. Click the join button below. They're already on the next story. But let's go back to the beginning, because none of this makes sense without it. The kitchen smelled like burnt coffee and old argument. I had driven 40 minutes to get to my uncle's house on a Tuesday afternoon, and I had sat at his table for exactly 11 minutes before I pulled the document from the folder I'd brought. The folder was plain manila. I had bought it specifically for this. Everything I had rehearsed on the drive over was sitting quietly in my chest, waiting. To understand how we got here, you need to know what came before it. My name is Renata Osei. I am 38 years old. My son, Callum, is my biological child, 17 years old, the kind of quiet that people mistake for shyness until they realize it's actually patience. His father, my ex-husband, has been out of the picture since Callum was 4. My uncle, my mother's younger brother, Desmond, is not Callum's blood relative in any legal or biological sense that connects him to my son. He is my uncle by blood. He is nothing to Callum except a man my son was taught to call family because I was raised to believe that word meant something. Desmond is 54. He married his wife, Philippa, 30 years ago. They never had children of their own. For most of my life, I understood this as a sadness they carried privately. Somewhere along the way, I couldn't tell you exactly when, that sadness curdled into something else. Into authority. Into the habit of treating every child in the extended family as a project they had been appointed to manage. Callum was 11 when Desmond first started offering his opinions on my parenting. It began small. A comment at a birthday dinner about screen time. A remark at Christmas about whether I was pushing Callum hard enough academically. Philippa always nodding beside him, her hand resting on Desmond's arm, the way a person steadies a piece of furniture they're proud of. I let it go. He was family. My mother adored him. Callum was fine. I was fine. By the time Callum was 14, Desmond had graduated to full assessments. He told me at my cousin's wedding reception, in front of 4 people, that Callum was, quote, going nowhere because you never taught him the value of real work. I remember the exact tablecloth. White linen with small silver threads. I remember folding my napkin very carefully and setting it beside my plate. I did not respond. What Desmond did not know, what I had not shared with anyone in that family yet, was that Callum had just been accepted to a competitive trade school apprenticeship program in automotive mechanics. The acceptance letter was on my refrigerator at home. I had filed Desmond's comment away. I had 11 of them by then. Callum took to that apprenticeship the way some kids take to sports. With his whole body. With every free hour. He started saving his apprenticeship wages from the first paycheck, which was smaller than anyone would believe, because trade school stipends are not generous, and by the time he was 15 and a half, he had enough to buy the frame of a 1989 Kawasaki that had been sitting in a salvage yard outside of town for so long it had developed its own ecosystem of rust and ambition. He paid $320 for it. He dragged it home in pieces in the back of my neighbor's truck. For the next 18 months, that motorcycle lived in our garage. Callum worked on it every weekend, every holiday break, every afternoon he could carve out after school and program hours. He ordered parts with his own money. He watched tutorials. He called his instructor at 9 o'clock at night with questions, and the instructor, a man named Gerald Pacheco, who I will be grateful to until I die, always picked up. By the time Callum was 17, that motorcycle ran. Not just ran. It was beautiful. Matte black frame, chrome details he had polished by hand, an engine that sounded like something expensive and deliberate. He registered it in his own name because it was his. Every penny of it. Every hour of it. The registration was filed, the title was in his name, the insurance was added to my policy with his name listed as the insured vehicle owner. I am meticulous about documents. My ex-husband taught me that, at least. Desmond came to see the motorcycle once. He stood in the garage doorway with his arms crossed and looked at it the way certain men look at things other people have built, like they're searching for the flaw that will let them say something useful. His voice went flat and instructive. A 17-year-old has no business owning something like this. That's an accident waiting for a lawsuit. Callum looked at him. Then he looked at me. Then he went back to adjusting the chain tension and said nothing. He'd learned that from me. Philippa touched Desmond's arm. He walked away. I filed that moment away. I had 19 of them now. In February, Callum's trade school program scheduled its final examinations over a 4-day period. He left on a Sunday afternoon with his tools and his notes, and that particular focused energy he carries when something matters to him. He would be staying in the dormitory at the program facility, 2 hours from our house, for the full examination week. I was at work on Wednesday when my phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. Then another buzz. Then a third. I looked at the screen during my lunch break. The first message was from Desmond. Boys don't need toys. I needed the cash. The second was from a neighbor 2 streets over, a woman named Cora Belafonte who had watched Callum grow up. Renata, there was a man loading a motorcycle into a truck outside your house this morning. I assumed you knew. Did you know? The third was from Desmond again, for $1,800, deposited into his personal account, from a buyer he had apparently found on a private selling platform 3 days prior. He had used the spare key he still had from when he'd helped me move into that house 6 years ago. He had entered my garage. He had taken my son's motorcycle. He had sold it. I sat in my car in the parking lot for 7 minutes. I did not call Desmond. I did not call my mother. I called Gerald Pacheco, Callum's instructor, and I asked him if the examinations could be completed before I said anything to my son. Gerald said he would do everything in his power to make sure Callum finished. Then I called the non-emergency police line. Then I called my attorney. Callum came home Friday evening. He walked through the front door, set his bag down, walked to the garage because he always checked on the motorcycle first, every single time, the way some people check on a sleeping child, and he stopped in the doorway. The garage was empty. He didn't ask me what happened. He came back inside, sat down at the kitchen table, and looked at his hands. He didn't speak for 2 full days. He didn't cry where I could see him. He ate the food I put in front of him, and he slept, and he looked at his hands. On the 3rd morning, I told him where we were going and why. I showed him the registration. I showed him the police report number. I showed him the email thread with my attorney. He looked at me for a long moment. His jaw was doing the thing it does when he's holding something very still inside. Then he said, quietly and precisely, okay. I didn't know it yet, but Desmond had already made 3 more mistakes in the 48 hours since the sale, and every single one of them was documented. The police report number was filed under case reference 47-09-TRAN. The detective assigned was a woman named Iris Maydamba, and she had called me back within 20 minutes of my initial report, which told me she had looked at the facts and understood immediately what they were. Grand theft auto. The vehicle was titled in a minor's name. The seller had no legal authority over the property. There was a digital payment trail, a text message confession, and a witness who had seen the motorcycle loaded into the truck. What Detective Maydamba did not know yet, what almost nobody in my family knew, was that I had spent the previous 2 years quietly building something that made Desmond's $4,800 look like a rounding error. I had kept it private for one reason, and it was not pride. It was Callum. When you are a single mother raising a child inside a family that has spent years positioning you as the one who can't quite manage, the one who needs guidance, the one whose decisions are always slightly suspect, you learn that information is either a shield or a target. If Desmond had known what I was doing, he would have found a way to make it about him. He would have inserted himself. He would have told my mother I was being reckless. He would have called my choices irresponsible until enough people believed him that I started to doubt myself. I had watched him do exactly that to 2 other family members over the years. I was not going to hand him the ammunition. So I said nothing. And I built. The first close call came 4 months before the motorcycle was taken. My cousin Adiz, Desmond's niece on a different branch, one of the few people in that family I actually liked, had come to visit me on a Saturday afternoon in October. We were sitting at my kitchen table with tea going cold between us when she looked around the house with that particular expression people wear when they are trying to calculate something without appearing to calculate it. Her voice came out careful and curious. "Renata, did you redo the floors in here?" "I had some work done over the summer," I said. Which was true. She tilted her head. "And the kitchen? That's a new countertop." "It is." She laughed, a warm, genuine sound that stopped when she realized I wasn't adding anything. "You doing okay? Financially, I mean." Because Uncle Des was saying something at dinner last week about how you were stretched thin and maybe the school program was going to be too much for you two. I set my mug down slowly. "I'm fine, Adiz." Desmond worries about things that aren't his. She held my eyes for a moment. The near miss was sitting right there on the table between us. She was 2 questions away from asking about the business registration, which had gone through 6 weeks earlier, which would have explained the floors and the countertop and the 3 new accounts my accountant, a man named Victor Shu, had helped me open in the fall. Victor had said, at our last meeting, with the particular dry satisfaction he saved for good news, "You are not stretched thin, Renata." Quite the opposite. Adiz looked down at her tea. Something shifted in her expression, a decision to let it go, or maybe just the recognition that I wasn't going to give her more. "Okay," she said. "Okay. I just wanted to check on you." That evening, after she left, I forwarded the quarterly summary Victor had sent me to the secure folder I had been building for 8 months. Then I drafted an email I did not send yet, addressed to my attorney, a woman named Priya Okonkwo, with the subject line, "Timeline check." I saved it. I had been saving a version of that email for weeks. I was not ready to send it yet. But I was getting closer. The second close call came 6 weeks later at my mother's house, during what she called a family dinner and what I privately called a performance review. Desmond was at the head of the table, which was not his table, but he had a talent for occupying spaces that weren't his as though they had always belonged to him. He was talking about a property he and Philippa were considering, a rental unit 2 towns over, which he described in the tone of a man announcing something the rest of the table should feel grateful to witness. Philippa's hand rested on his arm. "We've been looking at the numbers. It's a solid investment." From across the table, my mother said, genuinely proud, "Desmond always knows what he's doing with money." I was cutting a piece of chicken. I did not look up. Desmond turned to me. "You should think about something like that, Renata. Instead of all that money going into that boy's hobby equipment. Property is stability. A motorcycle is just..." He opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. "It's just a thing." I looked at him then. "You're right that property is a good investment," I said. Both of those things were true. I moved on from there. "Does anyone want more bread?" My mother passed the basket. The conversation moved. Desmond looked satisfied in the way he always did when he believed he had offered guidance and been heeded. What he did not know, what nobody at that table knew, was that I had closed on my second property 14 days prior. Not a rental unit 2 towns over. A 3-unit building 12 minutes from Callum's trade school, managed through the LLC that Victor had helped me structure 18 months ago. The first tenant had paid her deposit in September. The second had moved in before Thanksgiving. Priya Okonkwo knew. Victor Shu knew. Callum did not know yet, because I was waiting until his finals were done and he was home and sitting still, and I wanted to tell him properly, not as a secret, but as a fact about his future. Something solid he could stand on. I had been planning to tell him the weekend after he came home from examinations. Then Desmond sold his motorcycle. The family dinner, where everything finally broke open, was not planned by me. My mother called it a Saturday lunch, the kind she organized once a month to keep the family's center of gravity somewhere warm and familiar. She did not know what Desmond had done. Nobody had told her yet because I was waiting for the police process to move one more step before I introduced it into the family ecosystem. Callum knew. Victor knew. Priya knew. Detective Madamba was preparing paperwork. I debated not going. I sat with that option for about 4 minutes on the Friday night before, standing in my kitchen at 11 o'clock with my phone in my hand. Then I put the phone down and went to bed. I would go. Because Callum would not be there. He was spending the weekend with a friend from his program, deliberately, because I had asked him to give me that space, and because certain conversations need witnesses. My mother's house on a Saturday lunch smelled the way it always did, garlic and something sweet baking, the particular warmth of a house that has been lived in for 30 years. She had made jollof and fried plantains and a chicken stew that had been going since the previous evening. The table was set for 8. Adiz was there with her boyfriend. 2 of my mother's friends from church. Desmond and Philippa, who arrived 7 minutes after I did and brought a store-bought cake they set on the counter with the price sticker still on the bottom. Philippa smiled at me across the kitchen. Renata, how is Callum? How did the exams go? Her voice had that practiced warmth that had taken me years to stop believing in. I looked at her steadily. He finished. He did very well. Good. She turned to arrange the silverware that didn't need arranging. Boys need structure. The program has been good for him. Desmond came in from the hallway. He did not look at me directly, which told me his conscience was doing something, not enough, but something. He went to my mother and kissed her cheek and said something about the food smelling wonderful, and she lit up the way she always did for him. I sat down. For the first 40 minutes, everything was exactly as it always was. Adiz's boyfriend, a quiet man named Theo, talked about his work. My mother's church friends debated the new pastor's sermon style. Desmond held court about the rental property. The offer had been accepted, he announced, and Philippa pressed her lips together in a smile that I recognized as the expression of a woman who had wanted something for a long time and was trying not to show how much. My mother said, warmly, "You two always land on your feet." Desmond looked at me then. The first direct look since he'd arrived. His jaw moved. Some of us plan ahead. I picked up my fork and took a bite of plantain. I chewed. I swallowed. I said nothing. Adiz glanced at me across the table. I gave her nothing back. It was my mother's church friend, a small, sharp woman named B, who had known me since I was 7 years old, who broke the surface by accident. She turned to Desmond with genuine curiosity. "I heard you helped Renata out this week?" "Sold something for her." The room shifted in that particular way rooms do when something has been said that was only partially true and everyone present has a different version of the missing part. Desmond's shoulders settled back. He reached for his water glass. "I helped the family, yes." The air went out of my lungs and came back differently. Something in my chest went very still. Not calm, but the opposite of calm, the way the surface of water goes flat just before something large moves underneath it. I put my fork down. My mother looked between us. "What is this?" I heard my own voice come out measured and clear. Desmond entered my garage while Callum was away for school. He took Callum's motorcycle, which is registered in Callum's name and has been since the title was transferred, and he sold it to a private buyer for $4,800. He did not have Callum's permission. He did not have my permission. He used a key that was given to him 6 years ago to help me move furniture. I paused. The vehicle title was not in his name. It was not in my name. It was in my 17-year-old son's name. Which makes what he did Grand Theft Auto. I have a case number. Philippa's hand went to Desmond's arm. My mother said, "Renata." Desmond opened his mouth. The words that came out were, "That boy doesn't need a toy like that. He needs to focus on." B set her fork down very quietly. Adiz's boyfriend, Theo, looked at the ceiling. I was already reaching into my bag. I had printed the registration that morning. I had printed the police report cover sheet. I had printed the screenshot of Desmond's text message, "Boys don't need toys." I needed the cash, in the largest font size that still fit on a single page. I set all 3 documents on the table in a neat stack, and I slid them toward the center, where everyone could see them. My mother looked at the papers. Then at Desmond. Something moved across her face that I had not seen there before, not in 38 years of being her daughter. Desmond's jaw was working. He looked at the registration. He looked at the text message, printed in his own words, in 48-point font, and something happened to his posture. A slow, structural failure. I stood up. I picked up my phone. I walked to the hallway just off the kitchen, close enough to be heard, far enough to have a half wall between us, and I called Priya Okonkwo's cell phone. It was a Saturday. She answered in 2 rings, because I had texted her at 9 that morning to tell her I might need her. My voice came out low and even. Priya. Move up the timeline. A brief pause. Then, with the particular satisfaction she kept for moments like this, I'll have the formal notice filed by Monday morning. Do you want the cease and desist included or separate? Included. All of it. I came back to the table. Desmond had not moved. Philippa was looking at him, not at me, with an expression I could not quite read and did not need to. Adiz had both hands around her water glass. My mother was very still. The look on Desmond's face told me he had no idea what was about to arrive. I sat back down at my mother's table. The documents were still in the center of it, the registration, the police report cover sheet, the text message in 48-point font. Nobody had touched them. Desmond was looking at the stack the way a man looks at a bill he cannot pay. Philippa's hand was still on his arm, but her fingers had tightened, which told me she was holding herself together as much as she was holding him. My mother had not moved. B, her church friend, had pushed her chair back slightly from the table, not to leave, but to see better. Adiz had both hands flat on the tablecloth. Theo, beside her, had gone very still in the way quiet men go still when something true is happening in front of them and they understand the correct posture as witness. I folded my hands in my lap. I had 4 more things to say. I was going to say each of them once. The first thing I said was this: Desmond, the motorcycle was titled in Callum's name. Not mine. Yours was not on the paperwork anywhere. That means you had no legal authority to take it, no legal authority to sell it, and the money you received from the sale is not yours to keep. A pause. 2 seconds too long. Desmond's jaw moved. He looked at the registration sheet, my son's name across the top in clean black type, and he looked away from it. The boy lives in your house. Everything in that house. Her voice came out measured from beside him. Philippa, for the first time since I'd sat back down, speaking directly to me rather than to the air beside me. Renata. You know that's not what he meant. He was trying to help. B set her fork down, very quietly, for the second time that afternoon. I looked at Philippa. Help with what? Callum wasn't in trouble. His program was paid for. His tools were paid for. His motorcycle was paid for by him, from his own wages, over 18 months. I let that sit for exactly 1 beat. What specifically did Desmond help with? Philippa's hand stopped mid-gesture. She had been reaching for her water glass and she simply stopped, the way a person stops when the calculation they were doing silently comes out wrong. Nobody spoke. For 3 full seconds, nothing. I reached into the folder. The second document was the payment record, a screenshot of the private sale listing Desmond had posted, the buyer's transfer confirmation, and the timestamp. Posted 3 days before Callum's finals began. Which meant Desmond had been planning it while Callum was still at home, still working on the motorcycle, still saying goodbye to it before he left for the examination week. I placed it on top of the existing stack and slid it forward. Adiz looked at the timestamp. I watched her do the math. Something moved across her face, quiet, specific, and final. Desmond's voice came out different. Higher, tight at the edges, the way a voice sounds when the person producing it is working harder than usual to keep it level. I listed it because the boy needed to learn that the world doesn't run on passion projects. I was doing him a favor. You coddle him, Renata. You have always, my mother said, from her end of the table. Desmond. Just the name. 1 word, in a register I had not heard from her before, and it landed in the room like something heavy set down from a height. Desmond opened his mouth. Closed it. Tried again. My mother was looking at the documents. Her eyes moved from the registration to the text message, "Boys don't need toys." I needed the cash and back to the registration. She looked at it for a long time. Philippa reached for Desmond's arm again. He moved slightly away from her, not much, not dramatically, but enough that her hand fell back to the table. She looked at it. Then she looked somewhere else. I pulled the third document from the folder. This one was a printout of the statute. Grand theft auto, as defined by the relevant criminal code. I had printed it the night before, after Callum had gone to his friend's house, sitting at my kitchen table at 11:15 with a cup of tea that had gone completely cold. I had highlighted 3 lines in yellow: the definition of the offense, the minimum threshold for the felony classification, and the section that specified the vehicle's value as the determining factor. $4,800 sat comfortably above the felony threshold by several $100s. I set it in front of Desmond directly. Not in the center of the table. In front of him. The color started leaving his face. Not all at once, it went in sections, the way color leaves something when the temperature drops. His voice came out barely above a speaking level. "You're not going to, this is family, Renata. You're going to call the police on your own family over a—" "I already did," I said. "Case number 47-09-Tran. The detective's name is Iris Maydamba. She's expecting a follow-up from my attorney on Monday morning." Theo, at the far end of the table, exhaled through his nose. It was the first sound he had made in 20 minutes. Adiz looked at me. She did not look away. Philippa put her hand flat on the table. Her breath had changed, shallower, more deliberate, the kind of breathing a person does when they are trying not to show that they need to do it carefully. She attempted, one final time, to find the angle that would make this about something else. Her voice came out with the warmth she kept in reserve for moments she needed it most. "Renata, you know we love Callum. You know that whatever Desmond did, it came from a place of caring about this family. Surely there's a way to resolve this between us, before it becomes something that—" I looked at her. I kept my voice even and clear. "Philippa, the motorcycle was not Desmond's to sell. The money is not his to keep. And the key he used to enter my garage was not an invitation. Those are not family dynamics. Those are facts." I paused. "I'm not asking for a resolution between us. I'm describing what has already been set in motion." Her mouth closed. Something in her face went very still. She straightened in her chair. It was a small movement, a centimeter, maybe 2, but in the particular silence of that room it felt like a verdict. My mother looked at Desmond. She had known him for 54 years. He was her younger brother. She had driven him to his first job interview, paid his first month's rent in a city that didn't know his name yet, sat beside him at their father's funeral with her hand in his. I knew all of this. I had always known it. She looked at him for a long time without speaking. Then she said, quietly and with great precision, "Did you take that boy's motorcycle, Desmond?" His jaw worked. He reached for his water glass, and for the first time in the afternoon, I noticed that his hand was not entirely steady. He said, "I did what I thought was right." My mother nodded, once, slowly. She did not say anything else. She didn't need to. I looked at Desmond. I reached for the last document. I had saved this one. It had been sitting at the bottom of the folder since I'd printed it that morning, and I had placed everything else on top of it specifically so that it would be the last thing anyone in that room saw. If you've made it this far and you're not subscribed, do it now. Because what I'm about to show you is the thing that made Desmond's legs give out. You came here for it. Here it is. The final document was a letter. On Priya Okonkwo's letterhead, her full name, her firm name, her bar registration number across the top in clean professional type. It was addressed to Desmond Tran. It had been drafted 6 days before that lunch, updated the morning of, and the version in my hand was the version Priya had confirmed was ready to file. It was not just a cease and desist. Priya had included, attached as exhibits, the following: the vehicle title, the registration, the text message in which Desmond had admitted to the sale and stated his reason, the payment confirmation showing the $4,800 had transferred to his personal account, and a formal demand for the return of the full sale amount plus the assessed value of the labor. 18 months of documented apprenticeship-level mechanical work, which Gerald Pacheco had formally estimated. In a letter of his own, attached as Exhibit 5. Gerald had put the labor value, conservatively, at $11,300. The total demand figure on the letter was $16,100. I placed it in front of Desmond and I watched him read the number. He couldn't speak. He read it twice, I could tell by the way his eyes moved, and then he simply sat there. What happened to his face happened in sequence. The muscles around his jaw went first, then something behind his eyes, then his shoulders, and then, as I had described at the beginning, as I had lived through in real time, his body decided it could no longer support the weight of what he had just understood. He grabbed the edge of the table. He missed. He would have gone fully to the floor if Philippa had not caught him by the elbow, which she did, instinctively, even as her own face had gone white to the lips. The sound he made was not a word. It was the sound a person makes when the version of events they have been living inside collapses all at once. My mother put both hands flat on the table and looked at the letter for a long time. Then she looked at me. I had expected for years that when this moment came, whatever this moment turned out to be, she would look at me with something divided. Some mixture of love and loyalty and the weight of 54 years with her brother in one pan of the scale. She looked at me with something else entirely. She looked at me with recognition. Adiz stood up. Not dramatically, she simply rose from her chair and moved to stand behind me, one hand resting briefly on my shoulder before she stepped back. She didn't need to say anything. The move said it. Bee folded her napkin with the precision of a woman who has seen enough of the world to know when something important has just concluded. She looked at Desmond with an expression that had no warmth left in it and said, to no one in particular, well, now we know. Philippa looked at the letter. Then she looked at her husband, who was still holding the edge of the table, whose legs had not yet decided to work again, and she said, in a voice that was barely audible, Desmond, we have to fix this. He looked at her. He looked somewhere else. I gathered the documents. I placed them back in the folder in the order I had brought them. I closed the folder. I stood up. My hands had stopped shaking. I realized I had been holding my breath since I'd placed the final letter down. I let it out slowly, quietly, and I picked up my bag from the back of the chair. I looked at my mother. I'm going to pick up Callum this evening. I'll call you tomorrow. She nodded. Her eyes were bright. She said, tell him I love him. I said, I will. I walked out of my mother's house. The afternoon was overcast and cool, and the air outside smelled like rain that hadn't arrived yet. I sat in my car for 2 minutes without starting it. Then I texted Priya, file Monday. All of it. Then I texted Gerald Pacheco, thank you for the letter. He replied in 40 seconds. That kid earned every word of it. I drove to pick up my son. Priya filed on Monday morning as promised. Desmond did not contest the demand. His attorney, a man he hired and paid for with money he no longer had much of, sent a letter within 10 days indicating his client wished to resolve the matter without litigation. The settlement was signed on a Thursday afternoon 3 weeks after the lunch. The full $16,100 transferred to an account in Callum's name, cleared by the following Tuesday. Desmond also surrendered the spare key. The rental property he and Philippa had purchased went back on the market 8 months later. They had overextended the settlement, combined with costs they had apparently been carrying quietly for longer than anyone knew, made the monthly payments unsustainable. They moved into a smaller apartment in a town 40 minutes from my mother's house. Desmond's name has not appeared at a family gathering since the lunch. Philippa sent a text message to my mother in January, not to me, to my mother, that said they needed time. My mother read it aloud to me over the phone, and I said I understood completely, and I meant it. The third unit in my building filled in the spring. Victor Shoes sent me the updated portfolio summary in April and called it, in his particular dry way, a solid foundation. He was not wrong. Callum completed his trade school program with the highest marks in his cohort. Gerald Pacheco told me this at the certification ceremony, standing in a parking lot in the afternoon sun, with the particular pride of a man who has watched someone become what they were going to be. Callum shook his hand and thanked him. Then he turned to me and said quietly, with the economy of words he has always had, I want to build another one. I said, I know. We'll find you a better frame. He nodded. He went back to talking to his classmates. I stood there in that parking lot, and I let myself feel the full weight of it, the 18 months, the registration, the empty garage, the 2 days of silence, and then all of it that came after, and then I let it go. Not because it didn't matter. Because it was done, and what was in front of me was better than what was behind. I don't hate Desmond. I'm not sure I ever did. I think he is a man who spent his whole life being told he knew best and eventually believed it so completely that he stopped being able to see where he ended and other people's lives began. That's not a defense. It's just an explanation. And explanations are not the same as forgiveness, and forgiveness is not the same as access. He doesn't have access anymore. Neither does Philippa. That boundary costs me nothing to maintain. It feels, if I'm being precise about it, like setting something heavy down after carrying it for a very long time. My mother called me last Sunday. We talked for 40 minutes. She asked about the building, about Callum, about whether I was eating properly, which is the question she has asked me every week for 38 years regardless of everything else going on in the world. At the end of the call she said, I should have seen it sooner. I told her she saw it when she needed to. She said, that's generous. I said, it's accurate. That was enough for me. So, did I wait too long or did I play it exactly right? Tell me what you think in the comments. And if this story stayed with you, subscribe. I put out a new one every week and I don't repeat myself. If you want them early, uncut, and before anyone else hears them, click the join button right below. My members are already on the next one. I'll see you there.